It is September 16th. As I was putting together the kind of final touches on this video here today, I was looking for like an overarching theme in the forecast, like what is driving this atmosphere right now? What's driving this pattern? And I think the answer is there's a lack of theme. There is a lack of a coherent pattern driver that's kind of steering us in the long range right now. I think you heard Eric try to work through that yesterday in his video. So the theme's a lack of theme. I'm going to go with that answer here this morning. So what we're going to try to do in this video is find that maybe that next big thing, whether it's a West Pacific typhoon or something to help push this pattern along. And that's not uncommon. Like in the middle part of September, when we're kind of transitioning from summer to autumn, we just have generally a lack of flow at this time. We're waiting for these bigger fall systems that typically move through in October, maybe bring something of a more realized frost risk chance. And I think you can just kind of see that in the weather that we've talked about already early this week. With this trough here spinning over Montana, you can see that bringing showers and storms to Wyoming yesterday. That's the same trough that we were talking about like last week. I think like Monday and Tuesday of last week, we were still talking about the same system as it was kind of coming on shore. So it's still parked here across what we'll call the western U.S., maybe the kind of northern plains here. That low kind of swinging up through Canada yesterday. We did finally get some storms into Missouri. This area definitely hurting and waiting for precipitation over the last 30 to 40 days, but it was variable, not widespread rainfall, but those who got it kind of in this corridor here seeing quite a bit of it. And then Carolinas, we have this kind of North Carolina coastal low still spinning. Brought some rain yesterday to North Carolina. In fact, I'll just jump over those 24-hour rainfall totals. That sharp dividing line along the coast here up into southeastern Virginia, that's going to continue to push north here today, bringing more rain to the mid-Atlantic. And then you can see those spotty showers across the northern plains, Montana, Wyoming. And then the hit or miss storms here over Missouri and Iowa, Minnesota here yesterday. But again, some of these counties definitely hurting for precipitation. I do want to jump back. This is those Sunday tornado reports that Eric showed. Again, just this kind of, do you see the south to north pattern and the movement of these storms? That's indicative of this kind of lack of flow in the atmosphere. We don't have a lot of flow like this from west to east that would bring these lows through the Ohio Valley or into the Mid-Atlantic or into the Carolinas that would have worked or knocked back this drought a bit. It just hasn't been that kind of pattern over the last 30 to 40 days. A lot of flow or the movement of storms like this around this troughing that has been here over the central or the western U.S. that has brought the rain to the plains in the last few weeks. I do want to jump over and show the surface winds. I often kind of show the jet stream first, but I thought there's almost a little bit more to talk about. If we just look at these surface level winds, one, we talked about that coastal low spinning across North Carolina. You can see that there, more of a hybrid system. If we look here over in the eastern Pacific, this is Tropical Storm Mario, spinning west of Cabo and the Baja. We have this kind of rule that as you get past a line, you got to draw a line to the southwest of Cabo there. And as these storms start to inch north of that, they get into much cooler waters in the Pacific. So expecting pretty quick weakening here of Mario as it does so. We'll look at that a little bit closer near the end of the video here. And then if we look over in the central Atlantic, we don't see a tight circulation here, but there's definitely that open wave that we've been keeping on and expecting some sort of development from this over the next 7 days, National Hurricane Center. We'll talk about that in just a second here, but a lot more going on, I think, just here on the surface than up above, and we'll go ahead and do that. We'll look at the 500 millibar heights here. And you can see that trough here spinning across the plains. We talked about that in the slide before. But that main polar jet stream, it's still way up here over Canada. And right, we've just been kind of stuck underneath it in the continental U.S., and that's prevented these systems from kind of racing across your typical, fall low pressure systems that race cold fronts all the way through and have precipitation all the way along it. It's just been more of this, almost summer doldrums-like weather, and we've seen the warmth build in this week out ahead of that trough. If we take a bigger look at the tropics across the globe, you can see the West Pacific starting to look more active. We talked about the potential just yesterday. If we get one of these big recurving typhoons, that could be that trigger that pushes this pattern along, brings better jet stream level flow into the U.S. as we go through the end of September. So we'll be watching these closely. Again, I'll take a kind of a longer forecast dive into those near the end of this video. You can see the East Pacific behind Mario as that's expected to weaken here soon, but potentially another system behind it. And we'll have to talk about Mario as it could impact the California forecast going through the next kind of 3 to 5 days. And then the Atlantic, 90% chance that wave that we just looked at likely to develop again over the next week, and then maybe even another wave behind it, a lower chance of development, but something the National Hurricane Center is keeping their eye on over here in the central Atlantic. If we look a little bit closer at that wave currently spinning, you can see it's broad, but it has plenty of tropical thunderstorm activity associated with it. In fact, when we see this much convection around it, kind of in a broad area, you have storms all the way down here. You have some storms up here. You have some storms all the way over here. That's going to actually resist some initial development because it doesn't have, a tight area of thunderstorm development with which to wrap up a low-level center. So while it does indicate a pretty robust wave here, it tells me that this likely has some longer to go before it develops kind of a close low-level circulation that would allow it to be named by the National Hurricane Center. If we look over here in the eastern Pacific, again, Mario spinning here west of the Baja, another potential system behind it. If we look a little bit closer at Mario here this morning, losing, you can almost see it like live, a big thunderstorm blow up overnight, but it's starting to lose that activity here this morning. So without additional thunderstorm development, I think this is going to increasingly weaken as it moves toward the northwest. We can't actually see, on this infrared, the low-level circulation below that thunderstorm cirrus deck, but that storm expected to move to the northwest today, bringing moisture further to the north on its way to California. If we look at the 500 millibar height map this morning, I think this is indicative of this lack of flow, this lack of theme in the atmosphere right now. And that we've had a lot of troughs here in the Gulf of Alaska, and we just have this large ridge here across North America, and we have systems spinning underneath it. We talked about the coastal low over North Carolina. There's this kind of permanent trough, it feels like, that's been sitting here across the Continental Divide. That's bringing warmth to the middle and eastern part of the country here. And it's brought the rainfall through this area, but we don't have, a big trough that's bringing frost risk. We don't have, a low pressure system racing across the middle part of the country, bringing, different weather patterns day to day. And so we're just kind of stuck right now under this current pattern. So as I take this forecast forward, you see that trough spinning here over the plains. That's going to continue to move to the east through this week. We see this ridging, again, staying parked over Canada, Mario moving its moisture up into California. So take the forecast out into this weekend. Still there's that trough spinning across the Midwest, trying to push through the middle part of the country. But again, that troughing over Alaska, at least the Gulf of Alaska, if not the state thereof. And as that stays churning over here, it just keeps some sort of ridging persisting across North America. And we have these, cutoff lows underneath it. These are going to bring, weather to this area here, weather to the Midwest, but it's not these kind of big systems that we're typically waiting for, in fall. So that's what we're going to have to keep watching for in the forecast here. I just wanted to set that up before we got into the precipitation forecast that, even over the next kind of 5 to 10 days, we're lacking this strong forecast signal for that next big thing coming through in the long range. I will step through this ECMWF precipitation forecast here quickly. There's that coastal low, kind of identify some of these features before we get it moving. And then this trough broadly spinning over the northern plains. As I take this into this evening, 7 p.m. tonight, see additional showers expected across the central plains along the Continental Divide. Those continue tomorrow, Wednesday afternoon. Better precipitation coverage across Nebraska, South Dakota, and through the overnight, starting to push further to the east. So now when we get into Thursday afternoon, we can see how slow this trough is moving. At the beginning, it was like here over Wyoming, and we've just shifted it over South Dakota, Minnesota, North Dakota, that precipitation stretching down even into Texas and to New Mexico, waiting to see if this is going to push further east into the Midwest or eastern Missouri, right? We talked about the lack of rainfall there. And finally, as we get into Friday, this is Friday morning, better precipitation across Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma. Finally, by Friday evening, central, maybe even eastern Missouri towards St. Louis, all the way up again, still into the Dakotas here, the Red River, the north. Seeing precipitation chances late through Friday before finally pushing through on Saturday into Illinois, Wisconsin, maybe down further into the middle Mississippi River Valley with weaker precipitation coverage, but it is something, right? It is a chance for some rainfall to get into these areas that's been lacking so much of it over the last 30 to 40 days. I don't want to reverse this quickly. I'm going to take it back through Friday, Thursday, because we had another weather event. There's Mario, the remnants thereof, again, weakening quickly, so it's losing kind of broad precipitation shield typically associated with it. But as it moves north now, Wednesday, see rainfall by Thursday morning, maybe getting into Southern California towards San Diego, Los Angeles area. See, not a strong precipitation signal, but it is something, especially by like Thursday afternoon, right? The shower storm potential across the southern part of California increasing as we go through the week, even getting up into the Central Valley, Sierra foothills, over toward the central coastal ranges. This is, again, Friday afternoon. While we're talking about that Midwest precip, might be looking at some lower Colorado River Valley shower and storm chances, and then up into the Central Valley. Not widespread precip, but somewhat rare to get activity up here in September, right before kind of the new water year kicks off on October 1st. If we take the forecast further out into Sunday, we see that system weakening off into the upper Midwest, and that's where we were waiting for that next cutoff low to come diving out of the northern plains. You can see that on Monday, bringing additional shower and storm chances to Iowa, northern Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, maybe Oklahoma. A little bit further out in the forecast, but we do finally have a low pressure system, like an obvious one to talk about. This would be next Tuesday. And again, that's that cutoff low that's sneaking through the middle part of the country. Now, the forecast at this point, we're out 7 days. These cutoff lows are always a little bit hard to predict. You kind of shift them around 200 or 300 miles to the north or south. You're going to change the way this precipitation looks. But I think decent chances that the Ohio River Valley, at least the Midwest, sees better precip chances early next week in Tuesday, Wednesday. You see it struggling to get over here toward the eastern Corn Belt, however. If we look at the 5-day precipitation anomalies from the ECMWF, there's that Mario moisture getting up into southern California, maybe even portions of southern Arizona. Central Plains precip signal fairly strong as we get further out into this week. You'll notice that's starting to inch east as we go toward Friday and Saturday. And then that next system, that cutoff low, again, keep an eye on that. Let's take this forecast back. There it is, moving through the plains quickly before pushing into the middle Mississippi River Valley, kind of the middle, early to middle of next week. So we should see that pop up in the 4 to 10 day when I shift this over. And there you go. There's that low pushing into the Midwest here. And that 4 to 10 day precip. You'll notice, though, it leaves portions of the mid-Atlantic all the way over to Kentucky, central and eastern Tennessee, even portions of Indiana, Ohio dry as it kind of sits more so over this part of the country. But again, that's a week out. So we start shifting this low around a little bit, and that cutoff line could move around as well. And that's important. We're just looking at those last 30 days of precipitation deficits. And it's stark. I mean, anywhere from central and southern Iowa, the whole state of Missouri, portions of the southeast, certainly the Carolinas, extending all the way up into New England. You could even include like Michigan on this. It's been an impressive eastern U.S. drought that's been slowly developing again, maybe over the last 6 weeks, with lack of west to east flow and systems to talk about. Out ahead of the trough, which you can actually see the influence of that trough here in those relatively cooler high temperatures here today, but out ahead of it, we're warmer, and we're warmer in behind it in the Willamette Valley. If I take the forecast forward, you can see that warmth continuing across the Midwest, 90s continuing through the middle part of September here. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, with the additional plains precip activity, temperatures coming down there. We're staying warmer in the northwest with that Mario moisture, showers, clouds, lower temperatures for California. But we continue that warmth in the long range. Again, without an obvious trough to move through, we just lack a simple frost risk at this point through the last part of September here. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF, these are the probabilities from the ensemble that we reach below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Now it's instantaneous, so it doesn't accrue like some of these other probability charts that we show, but we can still just kind of watch for those high chances. I mean, we're well up into the upper elevations of the Colorado Rockies or Yellowstone. But I'm moving this forward, maybe something here in eastern Canada, just a blip, Canadian Rockies, but I mean, Tuesday of next week, you just don't see any, okay, maybe getting out toward next weekend, not this weekend, but next, we start to bring that frost level down a little bit in the upper elevations of the Rockies, but no, obvious frost risk, even all the way out toward October 1st. If we look at the 5 to 10 day and then the 10 to 15 day temperature forecast from the ECMWF ensemble, this is the next 5 days. See warmth across Canada, warmth across the Midwest, eastern U.S. underneath this broad ridge. There's that trough spinning over the plains, continental divide. Take this forecast out 5 to 10 days. Increasing warmth across North America. A little bit cooler under the areas of the middle Mississippi River Valley. We're expecting precip next week. And now finally 10 to 15 days with troughing increasing across California, increasing across the Gulf of Alaska. We're starting to see temperatures come down in this area here. And I think that does set up the stage, at least for the potential for that kind of early October pattern flip. And what often happens as we get into winter is I watch this area pretty closely. In fact, you can kind of draw this, I call it kind of almost like a bank of cold temperatures, which typically develops here first before pushing and kind of unleashing down into the continental U.S. So that is one mechanism to frost, in early October. If we cool off this area first, that can wash out later in October, and you can kind of flood if you will, this area with cooler temperatures. Now, as we get more into the heart of winter, you can push cold air this way, kind of almost out of the back door, but at least early on, I watch this area closely. So when I see this from September 25th to the 30th, this quarter start to go over a little bit cooler. And you have to imagine that, even seasonal, right? So this like white or slight yellow or slight blue is pretty cold up in this area this time of year. So our frost chance, at least the potential for it, starts to increase through the end of September, maybe into early October. So that is one signal that I'm keeping an eye on, even just kind of beyond the West Pacific typhoon chances that we've talked about. We do jump over and look at the ECMWF ensemble probabilities. This is for precipitation, 8 to 14 days. So again, that kind of 24th to the 30th range. As that troughing increases over the Gulf of Alaska, that's going to improve the flow across British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest, increasing precipitation chances for the Willamette Valley, portions of Northern California. But across the east, even with that little cutoff low that snuck through there, you can see, just a little bit more seasonal precipitation values in this corridor here. We don't see an obvious system to bring widespread rain through this part of the country right now. And so we're still waiting on that next, big pattern change in the atmosphere to kind of take us into fall. We're not seeing it from the MJO. Eric talked about this yesterday. If anything, the forecast has become, less obvious with respect to where the MJO is going. Right now, we're kind of having this Kelvin wave transition through the Atlantic. That's increasing the activity there that we talked about. But the forecast tries to take it almost back toward like phases, maybe like 4 or 5 over the maritime continent, which is Indonesia. We see this a little bit in the Hofmuller diagram. So if I jump over and show you along the equator here, where is the most ascent or green on this chart going down into the forecast? Here's the present day. There's this Kelvin wave that's racing across the Atlantic over the next kind of 5 to 10 days. So that's why we're watching that area for an uptick in activity. And we're seeing it right with the areas of interest from the National Hurricane Center. That activity may be expected to wane a bit as we go through the end of September into early October, as that MJO maybe, big question mark, transitions back over the maritime continent. And we ask a question mark because these aren't strong values, not as clear and obvious as maybe we were earlier on in September or late August. So curious to see, do we set up into maybe a more Indian Ocean rooted MJO? Because that would be very different than like phases 4 or 5. In fact, if I just jump over and show you phase 4 for early October, what that typically we might associate in the past, we actually do see some troughing for phase 4 in that first to second week of October, right? So some frost risk you could at least surmise from that. But without that kind of clear and obvious MJO signal in the forecast, it's not a high confidence forecast right now. But if I go into like phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, at least that transition there, starting to see more trough risk over maybe the central and eastern part of the country, where we might have to talk about frost in an area that's going over relatively warm, at least in the middle to latter part of September. We do jump over and look at the Climate Prediction Center, their week to 3 to 4 outlooks. This takes us from the 27th all the way out to October 10th. Eric touched on this yesterday. They do have at least more seasonal temperature chances moving into the middle part of the country at that time. Again, maybe showing some of that potential for that early October pattern change where we're cooling off the temperatures a bit. That's just one scenario. Not high confidence in that right now. Precipitation lower for the Ohio River Valley and the Tennessee Valley, unfortunately. If we take the forecast from the ECMWF ensemble, those 500 millibar heights, I'm taking it all the way out to Saturday, September 27th at this point. We've seen that Gulf of Alaska trough develop at this point. It's even starting to inch further to the east as we go from the 25th, 26th into the 27th. That's increasing those precipitation chances in the 8 to 14 day outlook for that corridor here. It's increasing dry chances for the central and eastern part of the country as it stays warm and dry downstream of that trough. That's the expectation. But if you do take this forecast and you push it forward in your head, there is this kind of possibility, if we can get some more momentum for the atmosphere, that this trough could ride up and over the continental divide at some point in early October, maybe dive in to the middle or eastern part of the country. Now, if I take the forecast forward, we're so far out, it's hard to even see that possibility in the forecast, but certainly don't see it as an obvious scenario from the ECMWF ensemble. More so kind of keeps the standing wave here across the Gulf of Alaska and keeps this area warmer at least through the end of the month. So not seeing it through the end of September here from the ECMWF ensemble, but this would allow this area to start cooling off a bit and at least sets up the potential for that later in October. ECMWF AIFS, often more of a strict signal in the long range, but again, seeing more troughing developing here across Northwest. This is Saturday, September 27th. This weak trough here, middle part of the country, likely not, a major frost risk without, strongly rooted against more of a long wave trough like we see here over Canada. But even this forecast, as you take it forward, it does get a cutoff low moving through the Midwest. But again, we have this deeper trough here over the Gulf of Alaska that kind of sits here as a standing wave. We still have a lack of kind of clear flow over this region here, despite having a cutoff low. So not seeing kind of that major, fall outbreak here at the end of September, but at least with this area cooling off, like I said, puts us somewhere to watch. And as we go through the early part of October, look at the extended forecast from the ECMWF, precipitation anomalies. Again, they're staying dry through much of October at this point. This takes us from the September 25th out through October 25th. Without that kind of clear signal, with more of the flow here versus moving west to east through this area here, just don't see an obvious precipitation signal. I will say, once we do make that transition, if it is in early October, where we do get one of these troughs that rides up and over the continental divide and comes through, that's just one forecast scenario that I've played out. These long-range forecasts for October are going to change, right? As that kind of broader pattern starts to change, these update kind of live in real time. So it looks dry now because the next 10 to 14 days is dry in this corridor here. And that's going to update if in 10 days from now, right, we're seeing that trough developing and moving through this part of the country with a big L, right? Remember those low pressure systems? And so we're gonna have to watch this forecast, but right now it's just not gonna pick up on that pattern change until it becomes more obvious in the forecast right now. I do want to jump over to the West Pacific because we talked about that as a potential trigger. These recurving typhoons in fall can shake up our pattern. We actually see it almost every year, at least at some point. And right now, one of the strongest signals is actually coming from the middle of those three different invest that we were keeping an eye on way at the beginning of this video. Let's see if maybe I can get that tab up without losing my place. So kind of number of areas that we're keeping an eye on here. If we jump all the way back, it's really this one that's moving to the west over kind of the next 7 days. We'll have to keep an eye on. This forecast actually takes us all the way out to Tuesday of next week, so a week from now. And that's developing some of these ensemble members of fairly strong typhoon kind of between the Philippines and Taiwan. Now, it doesn't have it recurving, at least at this time, but that is quite a bit of convection if it does develop, which could add a little bit more momentum to the Pacific jet stream. If we look further north, another potential system developing further to the north, that one does recurve, but on varying strength on different members here. Some of these keeping it weaker, kind of pushing it to the west. Some of these recurving it as a stronger typhoon, not an obvious forecast at this point, just a week out. You can see how wide of different scenarios there are with that one here, but it is something we'll have to keep an eye on. Both these systems adding a little bit of a kind of ripple into the Pacific jet stream that could downstream change things over on our end right now. But until that occurs, until this becomes more obvious in the forecast at this point, right, it's just a scenario in our heads at this point, just something to keep an eye on. We jump back over to the Atlantic, look closer at our potential next name system. It's kind of, this map's a little bit busy right now, so I'll take this forecast back. There's that first area of interest that the National Hurricane Center identified. We just looked, that was that kind of broad wave, broad shower and thunderstorm activity without a clear center. But as we take the forecast through this week, Friday, now Saturday, expected to develop likely into a named system, moving, jogging a little bit to the west here. But as I take the forecast into Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, a number of these ensemble members are recurving this one, fortunately out to sea. That's been a common solution for the system as we watch these models come in. Some of these taking it a little bit further to the west, but they're definitely an outlier camp right now. And even some of those that do jog further to the west still recurve. This is all the way out Wednesday of next week. We have to keep an eye on the remote possibility that one of these scenarios where it kind of bends even further to the west, gets closer to the Bahamas. We still can't rule out that this could be some sort of threat, maybe to the Bahamas, the continental U.S. But by and large, the expectation is that this will recurve and stay out to sea, fortunately, in the Atlantic, keeping it away from the continental U.S. And then that next system behind it, right, not as strong of a chance for development, and we don't see as many members developing in that into a potential named storm. I'll leave it there today as we kind of watch the West Pacific typhoon and then the loading up of that cooler air in Canada in the 10 to 15 days and then waiting on that fortunate rain that we're waiting for in the Ohio River Valley and the Middle Mississippi River Valley over the next kind of 4 to 10 days. Thanks for watching today, and Eric will talk with you all tomorrow.